Hello and welcome back to Conquering the JavaScript Interview. In today's session, we're going to be delving into the heart of JavaScript array searching with our own version of, like the video thumbnail and title gave away already, the includes method. So whether you're checking for the presence of elements or ensuring data integrity, the includes method is a good one to know how to master. And what better way to master it than writing it yourself? So before we dive on in, as always, make sure you check the description down below for a link to our community membership. For $25 a month, you get access to our front-end and back-end courses. Combine them, that's our entire full-stack program, and I have an entire Zero to Hero React course available to you as well. I'm in the process of working on a few more courses that are due to come out by the end of the year, if not sooner, and you will just automatically get access to those as well. Not to mention access to our Discord community where you can harangue me for help on your personal coding journey along with our other Covalence staff and alumni. And you'll also be able to request videos like this where you might have a question that spawns an entire video series or some content ideas for videos that I could, take from a question and make into a video for you. So you get access to all that stuff. So check the description down below for a link to that. Otherwise, let's keep on unraveling the includes method, right? So it is, I'm looking at today's date, 2023. It's kind of recent. It feels like it's recent. I don't know. It came out in ECMAScript 2016, which I think is ES7. I can never remember how they title these things correctly. It became very essential for quickly searching through arrays, and it's a straightforward way to check to see if an array contains a specific element, returning true, otherwise false. So it's pretty straightforward. A lot of the times before it was introduced, so if it was introduced in ECMAScript 2016, like 7-ish years ago. So, it's been around for the entirety of my coding journey, but when I first started, I remember seeing articles about includes being a new thing and getting used to using it. But before that, index of was your primary way to perform similar checks. However, index of had limitations, especially when it came to not a number. It would return at -1 even if not a number was present in the array, whereas includes will actually check for not a number and identify them in arrays and sparse arrays and things like that. So it's important to know that it's become the go-to method instead of index of for checking for values in there, data integrity, etc. So we're going to be implementing our own version here coming up in just a second. And I got and I can't say lazy on this one. I just copied a lot of the examples from the documentation on MDN, mostly because there are some very exceptional cases we're going to be coding today. This is still going to be meant for beginners to implement, but there's a couple of exceptions I want to throw in here. And one exception we're not going to throw in here is sparse arrays, meaning an array that looks like the following, like that, where if we are missing an element value in between there, we have to do some work to catch that. And I'm going to leave that to y'all if you're interested, because this video I don't want to make this video get overly complex when it needs to be a fairly straightforward and simple implementation. So we're not going to be covering all of the edge cases that includes can handle, but we'll be focusing on the following, making sure it can be called on a search index of -1. If we do not provide a search index, it should go for that, no problem. And I want it to handle not a number because it's a cool thing to know how to do. And it is not as straightforward as your newbie brain may think. And I also will be handling these really strange negative numbers. Again, these are from the MDN docs where I grab these examples to make sure that we can output the correct Boolean values here. So let's get underway. As always, we are going to be adding and modifying our array prototype with our own custom includes method. It's going to be a method that's meant to be invoked on the end of an array, which means we will be assigning it a function that we're going to be calling later. Now, our includes function, just like the real one, will be taking two values, or two parameters. We have an element we're going to be searching for somewhere inside of the array, and we can specify at what index we wish for it to start from. If 1 is not specified, it should probably have a default parameter value of the number 0 to make sure we start searching from the beginning of the array. Now, like I said, always, you should not modify array prototypes in your actual projects because of the amount of future proofing you have to worry about. Tons of conflicts if other individuals start working on your project or other libraries that might include something similar. You might have some problems. So don't modify objects you don't have any control over. You're better off making an entire library file and using it how you want to rather than doing it this way. But again, for interview purposes, this is a cool thing to know how to do, and it does just flex your fundamental knowledge of JavaScript. But continuing on. Okay. So we are going to be using the length and from index in several locations, as well as possibly messing with the value of the from index, which I'd rather not pollute this parameter by changing its value somewhere in my code, so I'll have to store it in a variable. And I'll show you what that means in a second. It is just meant for the negative possible values. So let's say they provide a search element. This is going to be fairly straightforward to calculate through. We are going to be using a while loop rather than a traditional for loop. The traditional for loop is great for starting at the beginning and going to the end of an array, but this is an undetermined number of iterations that might end quickly or shortly depending on what our index, like where we need to start based on our from index here. So we're going to use a while loop for this one, and that's what I tell my students. For loops, great for determined number of iterations. While loops, great for an undetermined number of iterations. So we're going to go with a while loop on this one. Again, just kind of go with what your gut tells you. Like I said, we're going to be using the length property of the array in a couple different locations. So I'm going to go ahead and put it into a variable for convenience sake. Again, this is like this micro optimization, a personal preference and pattern I will sometimes do using something like this into a variable. I have no doubt the caching or storing of a this.length accessor, getter property, it'll grab the length of the array over and over again. That could potentially be recalculated. I don't think it will be in code this simple, but putting into this variable might make it a bit cleaner and easier to use. We're also going to be using the following. Again, if the from index is a negative value or not provided or something like that, and I need to adjust it or do something with it, I'm going to put it into a variable because I don't want to be messing with the actual parameter from index. I want to leave it as is. So I'll grab a copy of its value, put it into a variable, and modify the variable as needed. So this needs to be as simple as the following. So long as our search or from index is not equal to our length, meaning it's less than our length, we're going to keep on iterating and trying to find an element. So we're going to say, if the element at this n index position, so this is like our I iterator for those newbies out there that are wondering why I chose n, number, why not, right? If it is strictly compared to the element we are searching for, that means we have found it, and that means this array includes that value, which means we can go ahead and return true. And this is utilizing some ES6 shorthand where I drop the curly braces of my if statement, and I simply one line. If you have one line of code after an if statement, it can go directly after the parentheses with no curly braces, which means this is an implicit one-line return right here. So yeah. Actually, it's not implicit because I wrote the keyword return. It's a one-line block of code. We drop the curly braces, and we can shorthand it as follows. That is, and if this entire loop completes and it hasn't found or returned true early, we simply return false at the end of our custom includes method, and we are good to go. This is as simple as it needs to be, but like I said, let's ratchet this up and begin flexing our beginner brains a little bit further. So let's have some edge cases. For example, there is no purpose in even looping through this entire array if their array, for example, has no length. This is a common edge case that you can set or think about inside of your interview scenarios. If you have an array that doesn't have a length, there's no point in searching through it. A little micro optimization that, again, could be all the difference between setting you apart from someone that just handles the problem in front of them versus you who handles the problem in front of you and takes a moment to think about edge case scenarios and things like that, right? Also, similarly, if our n value is outside the bounds of our array, there's also no point in searching it because they provided an invalid from index, and we should return false because, and remember, the length is the last index position plus 1, which is why we did greater than or equal to and not just greater than, because if it is the length, that's already out of bounds, because length, right, is last index plus 1. So that's what we have to be concerned with right there. So those are two terrific edge cases you can always try and take into consideration when dealing with arrays and search indexes and boundaries and things like that. Again, set you apart from others in an interview setting. Now, we need to account for this negative shenanigans right here. And it's actually a little bit simpler to code than you would think. It takes a second to understand how it helps us count, however. So we're going to say if n is less than 0, we have a negative index being provided to us. So we need to reassign n to make sure it can actually be in the bounds of our given array we are searching for a value for inside of. Oh my god, there's so many weird words there. It needs to be in the bounds of the array we're looking through. So This is why I said I wanted to put the from index parameter into a variable so I don't mess with the actual input value itself. I don't want my method to do that. Instead, I want to make sure I simply mess with an internal variable that is meant for this exact purpose I'm doing right here. We're going to say mathmax, okay, was it static method, returns the larger of a set of supplied numeric expressions. So we can give it a comma separated list of a ton of values, and it will find the largest one. Like one, if we gave mathmax 132, it would return 3 because 3 is the largest of this set of numbers. We're going to be doing the same thing of the following. If the value is negative, we're simply going to take len plus n, which basically lets us count backwards of the array and the starting index position if it's out of bounds. So basically what that is doing is we're adjusting the starting point to be within the array bounds. And how this works is len plus n is effectively counting backwards from the end of an array. That's what that calculation will do for us. Then putting that inside of math.max with the second set value there being 0 ensures that the calculated index doesn't fall below 0, which would be out of bounds for the array. So we're going to make sure that if this is meant to be a count backwards, that it's not going to be a negative value. If it is, it's just going to default back up to 0 or something like that. So that's how it's going to handle some of these weird scenarios over here that you are looking at inside of my examples that, like I said, I pulled from the MDN. Now, we also have to calculate what happens with not a number. Because remember at the beginning of my video, I mentioned that unlike index of, which always returned -1, even if not a number was present, we want this to be able to handle an array with not a number inside of it like that. So we want to make sure it's handled correctly. So how can we attribute for that? So something that's interesting is I want you all to know this. Not a number is a value in JavaScript that you can reference. However, it has some nuances and intricacies, meaning you can't compare it to itself because it returns false in JavaScript. That's going to be a bit of an issue, so we're going to have to account for a different way to do so. We cannot just compare it, which is why this bit of code is not going to be enough to handle this particular edge case scenario. We're going to have to use, there's two different ways to do it. I'm going to be choosing to do the number object. And there should be a property on here, a method called isNone. There we go. Right, so we can then compare if the number is not a number, right? So that's what we're going to be doing here. So basically we have to take our search element against our element in the array and compare it with these two right here. And this will actually get us true, which is what we're looking for. That's the comparison we want to do right here. So basically I need to take that console log and move it up here, right? So what we're going to be doing is, rather than a comparison, we can say ampersand, move all that into an if statement instead of the console log example I had down there. And what we're doing here is if not a number, but rather if our search element is not a number, and the element we're iterating over in the array is also not a number, then we also have another great little case where we can return true right there, and we now have this very niche edge case in a set of values or numbers where not a number exists. We can also handle that. Remember, that was the whole nice thing about includes compared to index of. So there we go. Hope we all learned something new about this cool isNone method right here on the number object. And yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about here, and I'll break down the math here in a little bit. But let's go ahead and try a couple of these up here. Now, I'm going to see if I can't do this all fancy-like by doing some quick copying and pasting. Copy and paste. I'm going to remove all of these asterisks. There we go. And what I wish to do is to move all of these into a console log. So I'll go ahead. Oops. I'm going to go ahead and let's see. Yeah, I'll do it this way. I'm going to put a text cursor at all these locations. There we go. Oh, I did that wrong, didn't I? Oops. All right, let's try that again, folks. I should have done it this way. There we go. Now I have all these in parentheses. I can hold Alt or Option on Mac and write a console log in front of them all, format, and there we go. Now we're going to hit our save, and nothing outputted. Why did nothing output, y'all? Custom includes, did I have a typo here somewhere? What have I done? Custom includes, array prototype. It is listed below. The console clears at the top there. They all say console log. That's interesting that they are. Do I have an infinite loop that I just didn't notice here? Get in the comments if y'all caught that while I was going through this code base here, and I talked about the for loop, and it's as simple as it needs to be. I was wrong. I know I got to do this, especially because we're not inside of a for loop that has the like I++ iterator code in the expressions up top and inside the parentheses. In while loops, you have to handle your own iteration process. I mean, you do in for loops as well, but you have to like write it in the actual code block here in a while loop. So I just basically was causing an infinite loop right here, which is why nothing was console logging. So yeah. Oopsie. That might have cost you some points in an interview. But, I mean, what you gonna say? You can prepare all you want, but mistakes in the heat of the moment are a real thing if you don't practice dealing with, like, nervousness and anxiety. I don't know if y'all want that generic video. Like, there'll be no coding, but there'll be just talking about how to coach yourself through when you are anxious or something like that. Some just general like circular breathing exercises, some mental games you could try to do to keep yourself sharp. Even like something I do, which is like tensing all my muscles for a moment and then relaxing entirely. These are just techniques to help you try and relax when you are anxious in that kind of setting. And maybe you won't forget stuff like this. So, yeah. Fun thing there. I had an infinite loop. It just kept checking forever and never actually iterated, which means I was going to lock up my CPU if I let it keep running any longer while I was testing there. So, hey, I love leaving in my errors and trying to reason how I missed them and why they caused an error or why we didn't see an error in this case. It was running correctly. It just wasn't iterating and never exiting the loop. So let's see if this matches up with the expected outcomes with our custom includes method and not the regular includes method, right? So the array 1, 2, 3 does include 2. Our first one should be true. 1, 2, 3 does not include 4, should return false. Should return false because we are starting at search index 3. 0, 1, 2, 3 is out of bounds. That returns false. Then we have should return true on -1. We'll talk about the math here in just a moment, but it should return true. So it does. There we go. Not a number. That was one of our major edge cases we wanted to account for. We managed to include the not a number check correctly. It returns true. And if we have a set of string values, we're going to make sure nothing stupid happens with our types, which means we're not doing any kind of loose comparisons here, folks. We're doing strict comparison only. The string value 1, string value 2, string value 3 doesn't include the number value 3. It does not. We get a false on that one. I'm going to do the exact same little custom copy-paste trickery down here with these negative values, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how that value works, how that trick works, just so y'all aren't too confused. So again, I'll do some quick little trickery here. Oh, I think when I was copying and pasting them up there, I forgot to remove them. I did. So technically these are incorrect, even though they're convenient. There we go. Whoopsie. Okay, so yeah, that's what we got going on here. And we get true, true, and true, 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 and false. So let's discuss a little bit more about how this calculates, and we'll figure out why it works the way it does. Okay, so for example, the first one, let's take a look at the first one on this includes -100, right? Length is 3 of that array, string A, string B, string C, that is a length of 3 in said array. N is -100. That is what we get for those two right there, which means len plus n, that count backwards calculation is 3 minus 100, which gets us a value of -97, which means the calculation will look like the following with our math.max call. We'll pass in a set of values of 97 and -97 rather, very important to have that negative symbol, and I say it, -97 and 0. And the largest value of this set returns 0, which means we begin counting from the beginning of the array, which includes A, hence why we get true. Same calculation for this -100, start counting at 0. Does it include B? It does. Same thing for this one on C. But let's take a look down here for what happens when we get a negative value of 2. Len is the same thing. Instead of -100, we get -2. Then over here, we get length plus n, which is 3, and we get plus -2. So if you want to be very technical here, it's plus -2, but we can always just rewrite that as -2 like that. That's what's actually happening, but if it makes y'all happy, we'll do it this way. 3 plus -2 gets us a value of 1, 3 minus 2. So that means we start counting from index position 1. That is how the negative from index is supposed to help us be counting, and that's what this code does right here. That means that if we have 1 and 0 as our math max, it returns 1 and begins counting from 1. And if we're going to count from 1, that will include right there B and C, right? Because index 1 is B and then index 2 is C, and we're not counting from the index of 0 like we did in the other cases. Hence why this should not find A if we begin counting after A. Hence why we get false. And so our code here correctly handles our negative index values, right? Now, if you were a newbie in an interview setting, I would say that if you can't quite remember how to do this or reason your way through it, maybe you might just make a condition that tells it, hey, don't give me negative numbers or something like that. So if n is less than 0, throw new error, please give me positive search indexes only. It may not show that you know everything about it, but it does show that you are thinking about negative index values possibly being an issue or something like that. So yeah, that about wraps it up for this video and this implementation. As always, I will be including these inside of a CODEPEN for your perusal. And in terms of what we use this for, I mean, feature flag checks, going through to see if a certain feature is true or something like that is pretty cool. User permissions is very similar to that. Data validation. A lot of these array methods are really good for data validation. If you're looking for a symbol, or maybe if you're working on a Twitter clone, in our course we have one called Chirper that our students code 6 or 7 different ways. If you're looking for example, in a string of characters, an @ symbol, so you can see if someone has pinged or mentioned somebody inside of a chirp or a tweet, then the @ symbol is indeed something you can look for in a string to see if it's included in there. So if you have to run any logic on the person's username after an @ symbol or something like that. Navigating routes, SPAs, usually includes method a lot to determine if the current URL or path includes specific parameters or segments. Aiding in route management, something you're going to be using a lot in React Router or TanStack Router, which I teach in my React course if you're interested in how to learn that stuff. Conditional rendering is also pretty cool, and how to do includes and things like that. So, yeah, thanks for joining us as we explored through this custom includes method. I'm having a lot of fun in this Array Architect series because I feel like I'm getting to learn just as much as I can try and teach y'all. Thank y'all for the comments. I know some of y'all have actually been out there putting in comments that have your own solutions and questions and things like that. I'm stoked. I love this discussion, this back and forth of both of us being able to learn and help from each other. That's what this journey is all about. We got to help take care of each other because the bosses out there don't guarantee that's going to be the case. But if we look out for each other, we can guarantee that. So yeah, do all the YouTube stuff. Make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun things. Click the bell notifications for more great videos that come from our series. I do a lot of the more data algorithm stuff as of late, but I'm interested in building like rebuilding one of my CRUD app courses. We have one coming out with my coworker Andrew, and my coworker Matt puts out a lot of fantastic video content and more bite-sized content sometimes on Fridays. So make sure you check out his expertise then. So keep coding with precision and creativity. Until next time, happy coding.